when peace is established across the nation, and we bow before you in adoration at the New Jerusalem, when the war is done, when the world is new and the tribes are one. The New Jerusalem, that's where we'll be, just worshiping the King of Kings, the God of all. Time when darkness is overcome by light, when evil is cast out from before you, as we lift up our hands just to praise you, as we stand face to face with Yeshua Messiah, we'll scream and we'll shout out, hallelujah.
I'm so glad you found your comb.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, God, for everything that you've given us today. Thank you for the meal that you gave us, and may you bless those who need blessing and pray for those who need prayer. Heal those who need healing, and may you give us the rest of the day a great day, and may you give us the week a great week. In Yeshua's name we pray, amen.
Amen. You know I'm messing with you, right? Okay. All righty. So now that I've got you over here, now I will dismiss you. So let the quiver head on out. Follow Jeremy on over, and Abby. Y'all have a great afternoon. All right, little ones, y'all need to hold up just a little bit, okay? Okay, I don't see Nayla. So, okay, hold on, guys. Let's wait for Miss Nayla to get here, okay? You'll take them over? Okay, so all you guys follow Mr. Robert on over there. Man, I wish I had some of that energy right now. All right. So, welcome back, everybody, joining us online. And right out of the gate here, I wanted to go ahead and address something that came in while we were at ONEG as it relates to some things I shared earlier today. And let's see. Yeah, Jonathan, can you pull the music down, please? If you don't mind. Nope. All right, thank you, Jonathan. So a question came in while we were away at ONEG, and it's a legitimate question, and it's just basically asking, it says, I have a sincere question about participating in something like the March of Life or praying for women outside of an abortion clinic. Basically asking, what if there's something that we do feel that's very important to stand with in a quote unquote protest kind of scenario. My thoughts were and are that there are some things that are worth fighting for, You know, there are those things that we take a stand for. I guess what I'm trying to address is the feeling that some may have that we just need to get louder than the other group, and we need to get a little more demonstrative than the other group. I'm not saying that it's wrong to or feel that it's wrong to be outside of an abortion clinic and pray for those young women going in there, or to even engage them in a conversation. I'm not speaking against that. I'm not speaking against if you want to march in a rally for life. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm not of the opinion that those kinds of things in and of themselves is going to affect any real change on a national level. It can send a message to politicians, perhaps, but is it, you know, I don't know that it's going to change the hearts and minds of thousands and tens of thousands, you know, of people. Maybe I'm wrong. That being said, I don't think there's anything wrong with participating in that. I don't believe that we should take up the same tactics as the world, thinking that we're going to get some kind of great result. I think, as I said earlier, it's a one-on-one thing. It's me and you, it's me and that person, it's you and that person engaging, and one step at a time, one person at a time. That's how we do things. And so I'm hopeful that you're trying to that you understand my heart in that. So I know that there are some people who are very, very heavily involved with some things, and I would never be so presumptuous as to say that you shouldn't do that. Every person's going to have to follow their own conscience in this, just like everything else. If the Father has put upon your heart to do this or to say that, that's what you should do. Who am I to say otherwise? I'm just trying to follow as closely as I know how the things that I see Yeshua doing. He didn't allow himself to become distracted or offended because people were, you know, responding to him in a certain way. He just continued to do what the Father had given him to do. He said what the Father told him to say. He did what the Father told him to do. And that's, you know, that's the best we can do. So anyway, I'm not speaking against people who march in the rallies for life. I'm not speaking against people who are actively engaged in countering the abortion clinics and Planned Parenthood and things like that. I wouldn't recommend that you become violent and aggressive and vulgar and profane and all those kinds of things as you contest these things. Because if we're going to represent ourselves as followers of the Messiah, then we need to behave ourselves in a way that brings honor to him and not dishonor. So I don't know how else to put it. So hopefully everybody understands what I'm trying to say here. So with that, do we have anyone who would like to chime in on this and voice an opinion? Or we're going to start with Clifford in the back.
I just would like to address one small issue, and I'm sure we'll have discussion later, but on this particular issue of gathering, it was in the 90s. There was a group called the Promise Keepers, and we went to Washington, D.C., and I rode my motorcycle up there with a group across the country, and we prayed all the way there. And it was a very special time in my life to be a part of a group of men who filled the mall, and we got on our face and prayed for our country and our leadership. We didn't tear anything up, and we didn't leave anything destroyed.
Right.
Okay. Later, there was a Million Men March that didn't do that, but I think you're very right, and I agree with you. There's a way to do those things humbly, quietly, and peacefully with the right spirit.
And that's all I'm saying. You know, just because somebody else gets loud and boisterous and, you know, wants to throw their weight around doesn't mean that we need to counter that or match that or even go beyond that. You know, I remember that rally that you're referring to, and to God that the mall would be filled with praying men and women every day, you know, not just once in a great while. you know. I'm hopeful that everybody understands what I'm really trying to get across here. We just don't want to act like the world to try to advance the kingdom, you know. That's what I'm saying. So if you feel like the Father is leading you to be involved with something and it meets peaceably and respectfully and it isn't trying to, you know, throw fuel on a fire, okay. You know, again, everyone's got to follow their conscience in that. But I go back to what Isaiah said. You won't hear his voice in the street. He's not going to break a bruised reed, and he's not going to snuff out a smoldering flax. You know, he's going to do what is right, and he is going to bring justice. And again, I stand by this. The most effective way is one person at a time. So. Who's next? Who wants to say something? Share something? Ask something? There's Nate over here.
I was just reflecting on reading through chapter 9, talking about the Pesach, and a conversation that we had just under a year ago now, I think. Concerning the word oto.
Oh, okay.
And in my book, it talks about, if I may, please disregard the bling on my glasses. I got them from Dollar General and they work great.
Well, now that you've called attention to them, I would like for somebody to get a camera shot.
You know? See it. When they're like, dude, is he wearing sparkles? Anyway.
What chapter are we in, Nate?
In chapter 9.
Okay.
When it talks about let the children of Israel, in verse 2, let the children of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight, you shall keep it at its appointed time. According to all its rites and ceremonies, you shall keep it. So Moshe told the children of Israel. Now, in English, it doesn't seem a whole lot in that sense, but if you're reading through the Hebrew, it actually begins with et. It said when it uses the word it, the aleph tav is in there, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but that generally will indicate that our Father's got his hand in that aleph tav is representative of our Father. And then further on, when it refers to, I just thought this was interesting. When it goes into and then it talks about the twilight.
Okay.
Arbaim. Ta'ashud oto. Talking about him or his feast,
right,
which was interesting, rather than its appointed time. So basically say, if I were to read it this way, let the children of Israel keep the Passover at our Father's appointed time on the 4th day of this month at twilight. You shall keep it at, and the oto is generally referring to the Mashiach, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
so it would be like his feast.
Right. Well, can I just interject real quick just to kind of bring everybody else up to speed? You know, what he's referring to, there's a word, it's spelled aleph, tav, vav. I don't have my tablet working because Brandon's not here to show you. But it's aleph, tav, vav. And it's pronounced oto. And a lot of times in Scripture, it'll be translated as it, I-T. And that's acceptable, but it's literally, you know, it's referring to him, you know. Or in this, if you want to put it in better English, in this particular scenario, his. So what Nate is saying is, in our translations, it'll say that we're to keep the Pesach in its appointed season, but we could read it as to keep it in his appointed season. So I just want to make sure everybody was clear on what you were saying here. Do what?
I'm glad somebody was understanding. It made sense in my brain, but I was like, I wonder if they're getting this. But it just really speaks prophetically. If you read it from the Hebrew, much more about our Messiah than just reading it, because it just sounds like it's,
Right.
it's almost like a de-escalating the importance of the feast, where it really points to our Messiah doing it at his appointed time. It's his feast. You keep it according to his appointed time. So it was just interesting.
Well, just underscores why everybody needs to be here starting Tuesday, June 23rd at 5:30. So when Nate's going to begin another phase of our Hebrew class, because there are certain things that you'll never see reading the text in English. I mean, it's not that you can't learn, and it's not that God can't speak to you through the English translation or through the Spanish translation or whatever translation, but they are translations, and they're just certain little nuances that you only really see once you're looking at it in Hebrew. For instance, Nate mentioned verse 2 when it talks about the Pesach. What he said that, and this is true, that the word Aleph Tav is connected to the word for Pesach, or HaPesach. And usually when you see Aleph Tav, and there are some instances that are even more prominent, I guess you'd say, but when you see the Aleph Tav, grammatically it's just serving as a sign of the direct object. It's a grammatical term. But when we look below the surface, we see that it's actually pointing us to the Aleph and Tav, which is the first and last, the beginning and the end. I'm sure he did not say, I'm the Alpha and Omega. I'm pretty confident he said, I'm the Aleph and the Tav, because he's speaking to another Jew. So anyway, the Aleph Tav is there before the word HaPesach, or the Passover. And so it's just what he's saying is that is a little hint about the Messiah and his role in the Passover, and then his appointed feasts. So just reiterating what you said, but just to, make sure everybody understands exactly what you're referring to. Did you want to say, was there something else? Oh, okay. Anyone else? Who's next? Is there anyone online, Jonathan, that you can pull up? Because if not, this is going to be a short session. Because, do what? All the pasta, that was my plan.
Me again.
Okay, that's fine. Go, Nate.
You had referenced about how Abba, the people didn't move unless the cloud moved, and they stayed when it stayed, and how difficult it can be having patience. And one of the things I love about my background, and I'm so thankful that Abba allowed me to go through the military, because I can envision a lot of things that could be going on in people's minds. And one of the toughest things, even though you have to sit and wait sometimes and being patient, that's you can get comfortable and do your thing, and you can find yourself to distract. But think about if you're the nation of Israel and you've just marched a day's journey of 20 miles with your family, and you've got all your luggage, and you're thinking, oh, good, the cloud stopped. So you're settling in, and you're just about to open up. Now, in my instance, it's been raining for weeks, and you're soaking wet, and you have mud in places you didn't know you had, and you haven't had a warm meal in weeks, and you finally settle down, and it's time to stop. And you pull out your MRE, and you start to warm it up, and your hands are all pruny. And then your commander or your platoon leader or sergeant comes up and goes, hey, we gotta move. What? It's time to move. You don't have time to, and think about families that had 4 or 5 children, and they had all their belongings, and they just set up camp, and then Abba said, it's time to move. How much more difficult? Either side is difficult depending on the person, and I think for me it was trying to learn how to be content in either situation, whether in patience or in you got to go now. I know you're getting comfortable. I know it's been a long day, but you got to go now. I can't wait for you. And so that was one of the toughest ones for me, was that when that platoon sergeant or that sergeant come up and said, I know you haven't slept for 24 hours. I know you haven't eaten. I know you're soaking wet. I know you wanted a minute, but we got to move, And especially as a private, not understanding that, not having that training early on. It blew my mind that, is this humanly possible? And then through time you realize, I've been there, but I've done that. It's a simple thing. Now it's my turn to help somebody else overcome that to where they can walk and maybe help. Because I'm sure that sergeant was thinking the same thing. I'm sure he was. But he wasn't just thinking of himself. He was thinking of the rest of these privates who are trying to learn. If I have a bad attitude about this, they're going to have a bad attitude, and it's going to perpetuate. But if I have a good attitude about it, and I always remember Sergeant Lopez and some of these other guys just having a good attitude in the midst of just the terrible situations and nasty situations, and going, well, if they can do it, those old guys can do it, I can do it too, And I think that's the way we need to be around each other, is not just thinking of ourselves. Even though we may be going through something difficult, we got to think about those around us, and how, not that we should just slide it under the rug, but learn how to go through it with that spirit, having the truth with the spirit. So that spoke to me too when we talked about cloud.
Well, and here's something else that comes to mind, provoked by what you just said. The reason Moses didn't go into the land was not because he killed an Egyptian taskmaster years before, or several other things we could mention. It was because when he struck the rock, instead of speaking to it, you did not hallow me in the eyes of the people. In other words, it seems to me he let his attitude kind of get in the way, and because he let his attitude take over and rule his actions at that moment, it looked bad to everybody else. And so we do have a responsibility in whatever station we are, whether it's mom or dad or pastor or teacher or what have you. We all have a responsibility for those that are around us. And if we have a bad attitude, they'll pick up on it. And usually if we have a bad attitude, it's pretty contagious. And so that's why when we go into Sukkot, it will be the season of our joy. Right, exactly. And we'll get back to that later. Anyway, so it's very important for us to have the right kind of an attitude. Beth has sent me one here. Okay, I'm going to read this, see if y'all can help me make sure I understand what she's asking. There's a question, is there a verse in the Bible referring to forced belief?
She asked to skip that.
Oh, she asked to skip that? Okay, all right, we'll skip that. Never mind. I know we are still in practice, but are we supposed to keep the Passover 1 month later since we're not in the land? The commandment is if you can't keep the Passover, you're away or you're contaminated or what have you, then 30 days later or a month later you can keep Pesach Sheni. Are we supposed to do that? I'm not going to be the arbiter of what we are supposed to do or not supposed to do. I will tell you that I know people who have done that, and if I found myself in a situation where I could not keep Pesach at the appointed time, then I would keep the Pesach Sheni as well. So that's just the way I see it. So if you are in a situation where you can't keep Pesach at the appointed time, then I'd highly recommend that you do Pesach Sheni. All right. There are some things that are required or expected when we are in the land, but that doesn't mean the principle and the pattern doesn't work outside of the land. We're practicing. So we might as well go ahead and practice Pesach Sheni as well. All right. And when somebody's ready, okay, I'll come back in just a moment. Can you please explain any spiritual significance to Miriam's leprosy as a result of her grumbling against Moshe? Don't grumble. Don't murmur. Don't engage in gossip and loose talk. for what it's worth, rabbinically anyway, it is believed that her Zorat was the result of her speaking against Moses and her Lashon Hara. So don't do that. Okay, Clifford.
Okay, I have a story, and because of what we just recently learned, a comment after the story. When I first came to know the Messiah, I had a wonderful teacher, and they shared this story. It was she had one son, and her husband's birthday, and she worked all day cleaning the house and making a special dinner and made a cake. And he comes in, he was a carpenter, just covered in dirt and the pressure of being a contractor. And he sat down and she fed him the dinner. And she said, "Wait, I have a surprise." And the little boy was like 4 or 5. And he said, "Please, please, please, can I carry the cake?" And she said, "Yeah." So the little boy comes into his dad and he's carrying the cake. And the dad looks and he smiles at the little boy, but he looks at his wife, whom he knows labored all day to do this special thing. And when I first come to the Messiah, I realized this story was about the attitude with which the Father allows you to carry the cake. You didn't make it. You have nothing to do with it. But he allows you to carry his love to somebody else. And your attitude needs to be like that little boy. Just thrilled to be able to be a part of that blessing. Last week we heard this, we did the Naso. And the Father pointed out how intensely important covenant relationships are. With the challenge of the woman who was jealousy. And then in Revelations with the 7th, the separation of the dividing of the brethren, the abomination, that terrible thing. And then in Genesis with that relationship that was also challenged by hearing another voice. And I guess it all came together for me as we're ready to walk into this Shavuot ministry that started here, is that sweet, sweet spirit. And now I'm aware of, I'm a little bit responsible for when I'm carrying this cake to make sure I'm not a stumbling block to whoever that blessing's coming to make sure that he preached it Wednesday, I'm clean when I bring, and I want to be this vessel to carry the cake for the Father.
It is a privilege, and it is an honor, and we should treat it as such. It's not something to be viewed as a labor or a burden. I mean, I guess it's really easy for us to look back at the children of Israel and say, they did this and they did that and they didn't do this and we would never do anything like that. But we do that all the time, don't we? So, yeah, it is very important that we keep our emotions in check, that we do not allow them to manifest in a way that creates a stumbling block for somebody else. You know, it's a totally different topic, but I think the principle still applies. There are things that, Paul says are lawful, but they're not expedient. And it'd be lawful for me to do this or not do that, but what is it going to do for that person who's not as mature? It might create a stumbling block for them. I've got a right to do this. Yeah, okay, but is it right for you to do? I've got a right to be mad. Okay, but is it right for you to be mad or to express it in this way in this particular setting? Because it might create a stumbling block for somebody, and that is the worst of it right there. Because somebody's always watching. Somebody's always observing. They're paying attention whether we think they are or not. And I was just told something earlier. There were some people who were supposed to be followers of the Messiah. They did something not so nice to someone, and this someone already has some reservations about people of faith, and it just kind of intensified their wanting to kind of keep their distance because they think, well, that's what they're all like. Well, we know that's not so. but that's the kind of thing that happens when we lay a stumbling block before somebody. Going back to, the thing about Sukkot. I mean, it kind of became a running joke, when I would say, this is the season of our joy. But it wasn't really a joke in that we were going to make certain that everybody understood. Get all your stuff worked out before we get to Sukkot. Get all your jazz and all your drama and all your bickering and all this kind of stuff and get it worked out before Sukkot, because that time of Elul, that time of Teshuvah, that's the time to talk about and deal with all the stuff. Because when we get to Sukkot, we're going to rejoice and it's going to be joyful. And, and we really did, and I commend everyone who was part of that. They really worked hard to keep their frustrations in check. Well, if we could just take that and then expand it and approach life every day. And I'm talking to myself too, because I get mad, I kick the dog, not really, just in my mind. No, I know. Well, I just told him that I don't. Okay, I do it in my head. I talk to the pine trees. I do all those things too. And we have to do that. I understand. But let's be very careful what's going on around us when we do that. Yeah. Anyway, who's next? Yes, ma'am. Serena, right? Geiger, was that it? Wow.
Hi. All right. So when we were doing the reading and you were talking about in chapter 11 in Numbers, about the people complaining, it actually has in my Bible like a cross-reference. So
okay.
That really spoke to me quite a bit, and it's 1 Corinthians 10, and it says here, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses, into the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. And so that really spoke to me, that so many people are kind of doing all these things. We're all going to church. We've been baptized. We're doing all these things, but it says, but with most of them, God was not well pleased. And I really kept thinking that they didn't remain set apart. That was kind of what I felt like God was saying in this scripture.
Well, were you done? Okay, I didn't want to interrupt you. I have referred to this many, many times to make this point. You read in verse, let's find it, verse 10. He says, don't murmur, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed by the destroyer. All right, so I like to make this point. We remember back in Egypt, when they were to put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts and lintels of their home, and they go into their home and they eat the Pesach and they eat the matzah and the bitter herbs, and the Creator says that He is going to pass over them when He sees the blood, because that's the token. That's the ot. That's the aleph tav in that particular case. Just a variation of the word oto. But when He sees the blood, that's the sign between me and you, and I will pass over you. I'm going to shield you. I'm going to protect you. Why? Because the destroyer is going through the land. And so the destroyer was the one who had to pass by their homes because the Father had passed over. My point. They trusted God then to save and deliver them from Egypt. But when they got into the wilderness, what happens? The destroyer that had to pass by their homes in Egypt is the one who brought destruction on them. Why? Because they were murmuring in their tents. So they believed God to save them. They just didn't believe God to finish the job. So, right, they didn't remain set apart, not only in their actions, but in their attitudes and their thinking. So I'm going to read some parts that you didn't, okay? 1 Corinthians 10, he says in verse 6, now these things were our examples, to the intent or for the purpose that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Okay? So maybe most of us would say, I don't really lust after evil things. Good. neither be idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And so, for the most part, I think most of us would say, I don't really have a problem with idolatry. Okay, good. Then it goes on, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. All right, well, I don't engage in that. Neither let us tempt the Messiah, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Then it goes on and says in verse 10, we just read it, neither murmur, don't complain, as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. And so the destroyer that had to pass them by in Egypt, because of the blood on the door, is the destroyer that brought destruction to them. And why? Complaining, murmuring, not believing God could finish what he started. So Paul makes it very clear, look at this. This is an example for us to go by, so don't make the same mistakes that they made. So if we're in that generation, in that time, it's very, very important that not only are our deeds righteous, but our motivation is as well, and that our attitudes are. And I'm gonna pick on me. The more I look at the news reports, the more I read about what's going on in the world, the more I hear about what's going on in the world. Not that I feel like we should be people that stick our head in the sand, but at the same time, the more I listen to all of these reports, the worse my attitude gets. And none of us need me to come in here with a bad attitude. Because if I have a bad attitude, it's going to be obvious, and it's going to be, pervasive, and it's going to affect somebody else, and they're going to have a bad attitude, and the next guy. So it's really important that we all have good attitudes, but apparently he's expecting me to have a really particularly good attitude about stuff because of the position that he's put me in. And wherever you're at in life, the same is true. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I quit social media this week. I did. I quit it. Has nothing to do really with what Brad said. It's something I'd been pondering a long time. But finally I said, I'm done. Because I cannot keep reading and watching this stuff all the time because it's affecting my attitude. It's affecting me in here when I go to bed, because I'm stirred up not in such a good way all the time. So I quit all that. I've got some other things I'm going to be doing here pretty soon too. And I'm not saying that to invite whatever. I'm saying it because I realize how important it is that my attitude, your attitude, our attitude be in the right place because of what we've been called to do in this day and age. We cannot be tainted and infected in the same way that everyone else is tainted and infected and expect that we're going to be set apart, because we'll end up doing exactly what they did. We'll end up murmuring, and the very destroyer that we were delivered from might be the very thing we're allowing to come into our lives. So anyway, thank you. This is the question. I'm going to read you the question. I'm not going to try to answer it right now because I don't have my information right in front of me. But in Numbers chapter 10 and verses 35 and 36 in Hebrew, there is a part of that text that is highlighted by inverted nuns, the letter nun. And so the scribes wrote these nuns backwards to call attention for some reason to this particular portion of text. So I'm reading the question, but I'm not going to answer it right now. If that gets posted on YouTube or what have you, I will try to go back and answer that later, but not right now. So if we have any more questions, Jonathan, you can bring them up. Who's next? All right. This morning you said the menorah was a sign of conquest, light over darkness. What is the prevailing thought of keeping a menorah lit at all times in one's home? What I said was that the light of the menorah is emblematic of spiritual conquest in that it is overcoming darkness with light. So the fact that the light burns is to say that light dispels darkness. Darkness accentuates light. So that's the idea behind it. But as far as the prevailing thought of keeping a menorah lit at all times in one's home, I don't know that there is a prevailing thought on that. I think that that is a matter of choice and preference and following your own conscience in that. So I've not heard any debate on the subject to determine whether or not there is a prevailing thought. So if you feel led to do so, have at it. All right? Anybody else? Oh, this must be a good one. A message? I was going to say, we might come back to that at some point. Maybe we'll just have to do a Wednesday night on that or something. But I don't know that we're going to cover all the bases in this short time. Yes.
So I was just, when I was listening to you this morning, it kind of struck me when you talked about how the people had longed for the food of Egypt and longed for the slavery there, and it just made me think in my head about just what's going on out there right now with, people who, on either side, really, if you think about it. Sure, there's the ones out there that, seem that you might think that would apply more to, like, oh, they're perfectly happy to live off the government and have people help them out and just kind of almost long to be enslaved by having the government take care of them. But then on the other hand, I got to thinking about, because I've heard this come up with people lately, the ones that are upset about all the statues and stuff being torn down, like all the Confederate statues and stuff that are coming down around the country. And just kind of like you made the point this morning about the three things that make people upset, you can kind of add it in there, obviously messing with their traditions, but, how important it is to remember that ages and traditions come and go. That people might be longing for, well, that was the old ways, and, that we'd like to have that still being around. But that, putting in a perspective of, what would Christ want for us? I don't know if I'm making any sense in what I'm trying to say, but, not being so tied into wanting to hold on to your traditions that you lose sight of what Christ would want you to do, going forward.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in our world that we could get very passionate about, depending on where we come from, how we were raised, our environment, the traditions that were instilled within us. I mean, back, 25 years ago now, when we first moved up to Tennessee, we were, already kind of moving in this direction. But we were still kind of mixed and mingled in how we were doing things at that point in time. So one day, I think I've told this story before, but one day I came home, I told Beth, I said, we're no longer doing Christmas, no mistletoe, no tinsel, no holly, I have spoken. Well, that went over real well. So, because, she wasn't where I was on that particular issue at that particular time. So, the passions were there, because of she, and I don't think I'm saying anything out of place here, she connected that holiday with warm fuzzies from her childhood. It had nothing to do with trees and tinsel and mistletoe and all that. It was the family time, and it was all the warm fuzzies associated with it. So when I started messing with that, no, she didn't do that. Too much. But the same idea applies here. you've got things that people, it's just part of who they are. It was ingrained in them. They grew up with that, or they felt that was very important, part of their heritage and all these kinds of things. And that's the kind of thing that, and I want to say this very carefully because I know that there will be people who are very passionate about some of these things that are going to have something to say later. We just have to be very careful not to get drawn into the back and forth over these things. Because what would the Messiah do? How would he respond to these things? On one hand, the person could argue that these memorials and these statues, they need to be taken down because they represent this, that, and the other. And then the other side, yeah, but you're trying to do this and you have a different motive. And you can go back and forth and who's right. And you look and go, well, I hear that argument, and I can see elements of this being true, and I can see elements of that being true. And so you get caught up into that, and passions start taking over. And before you know it, we've cast a stumbling block before somebody who's watching. So, I don't think it's wrong to have an opinion on these things. I don't think it's wrong to have a conviction about some of these things. But just because I have a right to do something, just because I have a right to say something, doesn't mean that it's right to do or to say. Because our job is to hallow him and sanctify his name in the sight of people. And that, if that means I have to bury my will, and I have to bury my emotions, and I have to bury what I would do and what I think, isn't that what we're called to do? So anyway, that's not very easy. But that's exactly why the adversary wants to pick. He wants to pick, and he wants to prod, he wants to poke, and just see how long can I poke you before you retaliate and say something that lays a stumbling block before this person here. So we're going to have to really, and we can't do it in our own might and power. It's only by his Spirit. Again, I think I say this every week, and I probably will until the Messiah returns. The hardest commandment to keep is love your neighbor as yourself, because that's the one that requires me to say no to me. Yes, sir. Let's just make it a family affair here.
I guess I'll go next. Well, I just before I came to church this morning, first of all, coming here has been amazing. We love everybody here, and when we've been searching for a long time to find a really good place to go to church and to really find a family, and now we're coming to here, and you think, I thought this morning, like, man, things are going so great, everything feels like we're on the right track, I'm doing good, patting myself on the back, and then I walk in the door, and I've got my shofar, which I forget every time I come here, so I don't get to practice with the guys. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go practice with the guys. And I walk in there, and I say a bunch of stupid stuff about everything going on out there, like the thing in Seattle and all that, and start being like, yeah, I'm going to, stand up, and I'm not going to put up with this stuff. And then you go giving a message about how that's exactly not what Jesus would do, And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, that was stupid to say all that. So, I had to go back to the guys and say, no, I really wouldn't say all that, and I wouldn't do all that, but, shouldn't sound so tough, I guess. But, and then you talked about, just now, about social media, and by gum, if I wasn't just like 20 minutes ago thinking I really should give that up, because it seems to always depress me and keep on distracting me. And so I'm like, great, now I was not doing that right either. I probably should give that up too. So I'm just confirming that every time I think, I'm like, but no, now I got to work on that too. So I agree with you. The social media thing is horrible. It's addictive. And I really need to give it up because it does affect my attitude. My wife gets frustrated with me. Last night I came home and I'm like, man, you wouldn't believe what they're posting on there, and all these crazy people doing all this crazy stuff, and, Black Lives Matter, and what they're doing. And I read some stuff about, where their funds are going to. A guy just posted some stuff on there about that, and I'm like, that ain't right. And, but it just is all a bunch of hateful feelings, and really, how is that ministering to anybody? How does any of that help me love my neighbor. You know, it doesn't. It just makes me even have to fight harder to love my neighbor. You know, because then I think the first thing I want to do is think, well, my neighbor's going to come over and try to steal a can of peas from me. I better get my guns ready. You know? So...
Well, they say
I didn't know he liked peas so much. He keeps bringing that up.
Okay, well, canned food, corn.
they're coming to get your stuff,
They're
right?
coming to get my stuff, man. You know, so I'm thinking I probably need to start being more willing to, like, give them the can or maybe, like, take them a meal.
As opposed to opening up a can, is that right?
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, and for me, it's really easy because Adrian's my neighbor, and, you know, their guys are the coolest guys in the world, so it's easy to love my neighbor more than myself. Got lucky there. Anyway, so yeah.
Did you spend any time in a confessional booth in your past?
You got one? Where's it at?
I'm playing. Well, let me say this. Look, I made the decision personally to quit some of the social media, you know, Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that, just because, like I said, it was affecting my attitude because I was reading all this stuff just constantly. And I'm not going to stick my head in the sand and pretend that stuff isn't happening. For the record, I think the stuff that's going on in Seattle is stupid. Okay? I remember when we were in Seattle several years ago, this is when we went on the Alaska cruise. All right? We were staying right downtown. We were staying in the Evergreen. Was that the name of it? Where the Beatles stayed? Yeah, okay. So we're walking down the streets of Seattle. I've got my young kids, Alan and Allison. This is probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. Walking down the streets of Seattle, and I look over, and there is a dude. He's probably 6 foot, burly guy, you know, Paul Bunyan beard, okay, in a wedding dress. I kid you not, in a wedding dress with combat boots on. And I looked at that, I'm like, thank God my dad is not here. And I mean, there was other things. There was a guy that was on the sidewalk. I am not exaggerating this either. He was on the sidewalk. He's sitting there. He's got a box in front of him. He's got a sign that says, I'm not going to lie to you. I want money for weed. And I looked in the box, and there's all kind of money in his box for him to go back. All right, so the stuff going on in Seattle is stupid, is the point, okay? So I've got a strong opinion about that. How do you fix it? Not by screaming and hollering and having a bad attitude with my family because stuff in Seattle is stupid, you know? So, you know, the congregation has a Facebook page. Shoreshing Ministries has a Facebook page. And we'll keep that up because there are people who use that to watch what's going on here. We'll do that. And by the way, if you're sending me messages through Facebook and you're not getting an answer, there is a reason for that. I don't go on Facebook, so I'm not going to see them. But when it becomes something that keeps you stirred up in the bad way, that's that eye you should probably pluck out if it's offending you. You know, that's that thing you should cut off if it's offending you. You know, and I'm paraphrasing what Yeshua said, but better to go into the kingdom maimed, you know, than to go into hell with everything intact, you know. And that's a paraphrase. But I think that's what the Father is. I know that's what He's doing in me. You know, there's these little things that need to fall off. These weights, you know, we need to just kind of lay them aside because they're not really doing me any good. Okay, and I'm not saying that social media hasn't been a good thing for some. I'm not saying that. For me, this is where I'm at. You know, those little things that are going to affect my attitude need to be cut off in a bad way. They need to be cut off because not only do I have a responsibility to the congregation, I have a responsibility to my wife and my kids. Because I don't want, you know, to be somebody that walks in the door and they're like, oh no, he's back. You know, that kind of a thing, right? Anyway, who's next? Yeah, oh. Well, you remember that thing on 60 Minutes, point, counterpoint, you know? And then they did a takeoff on it on Saturday Night Live. When I looked at her, that look she had on her face was like, man, I'm fixing to get slammed. I'm playing with you.
I'm not sure I like that response.
I'm playing.
I know.
I love you.
You also have to go home with me.
Yeah, I know. I'm scared of you, too.
No, you're not. Seriously, going off of what Steve was saying, the different things that we look at, everything is available right in our face all of the time with what's going on out in the world, and some is purposely more in our face than it should be. We do have a choice as to what we'll allow to affect us. So I think some of the decisions that are being made are very good ones to distance ourselves from some of these things. But I think at the end of the day, whether you fall into the camp of get rid of the statues or I'll die trying to keep the statues, it's all about I want my way. And it's all about I want what I think is right. And at the end of the day, it should be about what does he want and how does he want me to participate in making that happen. Because what we need to remember is no matter which camp we fall in, eventually every knee will bow and every knee will confess. And that's what we need to keep in mind. Let's be part of that team and make it a pleasant experience for people to come to know him, and instead of it being a deathbed kind of situation because they've been out in the wrong camp and they realize almost too late that they need to change their path. And we need to be the ones who are doing what you said earlier, lighting that little bitty oil lamp and just holding it before us and asking the Father, put my foot on the next step that you want me to take. Because if we're doing that, like the message says, we're not going to have time to be blinding somebody else with our light or shining it on ourselves to say, look how great I am. But it's going to be lighting our path and keeping our foot where the Father wants us to go. And that's a peaceful place to be. And we need to let that be what draws people in, and not all of the rebellion and chaos that's going on out there, because it's not about what we want. It's not about getting our way. It should always be about his way and how we participate in that.
Amen. Very well said. So maybe the argument should be we should not be fighting for statues. We should be fighting for his statutes. I thought that was pretty good. Just come to me. Yeah. Okay. Who is next? Anyone? Is there any? Yes. Yes. Ingrid?
We were saying you should tweet that.
No. All right, so everybody online, here's what just was just said. They said, oh, you should tweet that. Oh, never mind. Can't do that. No, I can't do that. I dropped off. Anyway.
Just going back with the grumbling bit. A couple of things. One was that, where are you looking?
I love that. The grumbling bit.
The grumbling bit, yeah.
I like that. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the grumbling bit can get you killed. Anyway, all the grumbling came about because of things that were happening to their flesh, and the things they didn't like about their flesh. Their flesh wanted the good food. Their flesh didn't like this circumstance or that circumstance, whether it was water or whatever. They just had issues. And in looking forward, it seems like a lot of things may happen that will impact our flesh, with hopefully not lack of food, but, all this kind of things. And I think that's where we have to definitely keep our trust in God to provide for us. And even if he gives us manna, which I guess I'm speaking metaphorically, whether it's just lettuce stuff to eat, we got to keep from grumbling and remember that he is supplying our needs. And the other thing I was thinking about too is that you look at the difference between Moses and the children of Israel. Moses was raised as a prince, as a ruler, and yet, I want to say Hebrews, it says that he turned his back on all that to identify with God's people. And yet the children of Israel grew up as slaves, and they could not hardly even turn their backs from that. And it also reminds me of Yeshua, who came from heaven and in a sense turned his back on that out of love for us to save us. And we, growing up as slaves of sin, can't hardly turn our backs on that. And we need to have the mind of Yeshua that we are turning our backs on all this stuff. And for what reason? For the purpose to serve him and give him honor and do his will. And that's a huge thing to try and do.
Very well said. I mean, these are things we all know here, you know. But when you're actually put in a situation that you have to walk it out, it's a totally different scenario, you know. But I think that's where we're at, you know. How many of you have, you know, the last few weeks you've gone into an eatery that you really, really like, and you go in, and everybody's talking to you like this. Can I help you? Sorry, I can't understand you. Okay? Or you go to sit down at a table, well, I can't because they got that one taped off or X'd out and all this kind of stuff. And I'll tell on myself, I've gone in there, I'm like, this is so aggravating. This is rah, 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 right? Because I can't go into Chili's and get, you know, sit down where I want to sit down. And they got the menu is like really, there's nothing hardly on the menu anymore, you know, and I found myself griping and complaining about it. Why? Because it affected my flesh. And I'm like, later I thought about it. I mean, it's like, really, Bill, you know, that's not going to cut it if we're really living in the time that we think we're living. You know, there's going to be more stuff coming down. There's going to be another wave after another wave after another wave. And I guess what I'm saying is that some of these things that have been happening recently, for me, is just the Father showing me how much of that I'm still holding on to. And so now, time to let go of those things and to lay those weights aside, because it may not have kept me from running the race so far, but it could be the thing that keeps me from finishing the race in the future. All right. Who was next? Walt? Keeping Robert busy over here, guys. So the question has come in. Well, hold on, Walt. I'll get to you in just one second. Beth brought up something somebody asked. Should we stop? What now? Say it again. Should we stop watching Fox News and other news programs? Should we stop watching the news? I'll tell you a story. When my dad was alive, I talk about my dad a lot, and I loved my dad. I respected my dad. A lot of what I learned from my dad is what not to do. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just the way it is. But my dad kept Fox News on, it seemed, 24/7. And the whole time it was on, and I'm not exaggerating there. I mean, it kept him worked up all the time because of all the stupid things that were going on in Seattle, you know, or wherever, you know, and it kept him ramped up all the time. And this is the part that, you know, if my mom is watching, you know, forgive me, but this is the truth. It kept him so ramped up all the time that my older boys, who were small at the time, just really didn't want to go over there because it was just, you know, tense and, you know, just all this stuff all the time. So the point is, if watching Fox or MSNBC or CNN or whatever, if it keeps you ramped up all the time and with a bad attitude and people don't really want to be around you, yeah, you might want to start thinking about that. You know, but everyone has to follow their own conscience in that. You know, I'm not telling you what you should do, shouldn't do. I'm just telling you that, what is watching all of that doing to you? Walt?
Let's speak about the quail and the manna. The murmuring that went in the camp of the Hebrews was just so amazing. It was consistent. It was much more consistent than them walking in Torah. Or not walking in Torah, but walking the way Moses was instructing them. And I went to see what Paul had to say about it. He says, "Brethren, join us in following my example, and note those who so walk as you have us for a pattern. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Mashiach, who end is destructions, who God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame." It seems a lot of controversy comes up over the food. It's every Sabbath we talk about it. Every night we decide what we're going to eat. But when you take the gift that God gave you, manna in the wilderness, and then just cry out for, you want more meat, what happened to the cattle? We spoke about that, I think, a couple of weeks ago. What happened to all the cattle they had? They must have still had them while they were chewing and dying on the quail.
Right.
To me, it is a pattern, and it starts with murmuring. We spoke about jealousy, anger, hatred, and murder. There it is right in front of us. They were jealous because they weren't getting what they wanted. They were angry, and it would have went to murder.
Well, and again, what does Paul tell us about that generation? Don't do what they did. Learn from their example. You see the end result of this. It's not going to pay well. So, were you going to add? Oh, was that it? Okay. All right. Can you comment on the Hebrew meaning of the word devices? Do you think the Paleo picture language gives a good understanding of the Hebrew words? Well, the second part of the question, as far as does Paleo Hebrew give a good understanding of the Hebrew words, I would say in some of them, maybe even many of them. I don't know that I could just say across the board exclusively that it always gives you the best understanding, but it can give you some insight because those Hebrew letters are, were pictographs, and there's meaning and concepts embedded in Hebrew words. I do believe that. As far as the first part of your question, the meaning of the word devices, that's a Brad question. Wildbranch.org. And I think that teaching that he talked about when he was here at Shavuot gets into those kinds of things. So he's already done the homework, so just check him out there and see what he has to say, because I don't have an answer for you. Who's next? Yes. Confession time again? No, I'm just playing. I'm picking at you. I'm playing.
As a matter of fact, yes. No, actually, what I was thinking about, just kind of continuing on that, like the social media stuff. I mean, after I thought about that, and it's because the next thing I thought is, thinking about it from a shepherd and a sheep standpoint, which do we really need to immerse ourselves in all of the information in the world, or do we just need to follow the shepherd? I mean, isn't our calling to just follow his voice? Does it, and how much does knowing everything that's going on in the world help us do that?
As far as I'm concerned, it was drowning out his voice.
Yeah, exactly. That's.
Sometimes it's hard. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Sometimes it's hard enough to know what is it you want me to do. It's complicated when all these other voices are telling you what you should do.
Right.
So I'm going to seemingly contradict something I said earlier today in regards to wanting to go back to what used to be. But there are times that I wish we were still on rotary phones and that there were no such things as computers and cell phones and debit cards and, all that kind of stuff. Some things were probably a little more complicated, took a little longer to do and to accomplish, but then in some ways life was a lot simpler. And then there are people who are older than me could probably take it on back a little farther. But that's not where we're at. We're in the here and the now, and the Creator is calling us to be a set-apart people. We live by a higher standard. We're called to a higher standard, and we're expected to live by it. And so I guess we're just kind of going through that process that I mentioned earlier, the redemptive process. In each stage of things, whether it's sitting idle or on the move, you're learning some things about yourself, and those things that need to be purged, He's bringing to our attention, and so that's what we're trying to work on. All of us, or maybe at different places in that, but if we're listening, He'll speak.
Yeah, that led me to an even more difficult thought, which was when you were talking about the fringe people that were going through.
Whoa. The French or the fringe?
Fringe.
Just wanted to clarify that.
The fringe.
This is how rumors get started.
Those crazy Frenchies. But no, the fringe going through, coming out of Egypt and going through the wilderness. And then I'm thinking, man, so it was Egypt that was really tugging them back. I mean, that was really what pulled them away. And I'm thinking, so I was like, and if, I don't know, probably God's like, yeah, I guess what your Egypt is. And I got to thinking, man, we've moved to Cleveland and we really like our house around. And I've towed this Mustang around that I have forever. I've had it for 20 plus years. And I just got...
Man, if you could have seen the look you just got.
No, I'm going somewhere. Okay, so we've had this old classic car forever, and we haven't been able to drive it because, first of all, we've never been able to afford to fix it up and make it nice. And so it just so happened that we were able to afford to fix it up and get it nice looking. And now we have it. And then it's like this morning, God's like, guess what your Egypt is? And because I'm like, well, so if you're asking, and I was just thinking, what if He asks us to go to Israel? What if He says, I'm calling you home. I'm calling you all to the promised land. What would you be willing to leave behind if that still, quiet voice did that? And I'm like, I guess the Mustang and everything else. But I really don't want to, so I kind of feel like, and I'm just being honest.
Well, good. I'm glad you are.
That's just it. It's just, I'm thinking to myself, man, how hard would that be to walk away from all that? If things got to the point where you just got to take the clothes on your back, that would be tough. So, I don't know. Something to pray about.
Well, that's why, to this day, I'm convinced the Father has not let me have a 57 Chevy Bel Air. Yeah, candy apple red. Because if I had a 57 Chevy Bel Air, hint, hint, wink, wink, I'd be driving around, playing my tunes, Yeah, so that's probably not going to happen for me. So anyway, did you have something else you wanted to share?
No, I'm just throwing it out there.
All right. Well, but it's what you're saying. Every one of us needs to embrace is that we're all going to be called to leave that, whatever that is, behind, to lay aside every weight because we have to finish the race. Is there anyone else? Yes.
Sorry, real quick.
Yes, sir.
I have been, even in our own home with our devices and stuff, I've been praying about this for months about how these things affect us. And you go back to the 80s or whatever, and we didn't have all that. And we got around, we had a good time. We didn't need all that information. And I remember, I think I might have mentioned this recently, that I ended up at a Jewish synagogue one day, and I was just starting to learn Hebrew. And I read on the book, it said, Ha'etz l'chaim. And I was trying to figure out, Ha'etz tree of life. And I said, that's the Torah? And he said, yeah. And I started thinking about, well, if that's Ha'etz l'chaim, then if there was a tree of life back in the day, then there's probably got to be a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then I started thinking about it. Well, we have that. We have our internet. It's full of everything. We can get good and evil off of it. So in my own life, how I have been trying to make sure that it doesn't have a control of me is, I don't even know where my cell phone is right now. It's somewhere. Is distance.
Mine's right here. So
distance myself from it, because even though I need it for work, I leave it at my desk and I forget about it. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm not twitching right now. I'm not trying to figure out, what's next? What do I got to have next in order to feel like I'm getting my media crack for the day? Whether it's Facebook or anything like that. It's being able to look at it and go, I don't need that. I'm just leave it right there. Or even go, oh, did anybody see my cell phone? I forget where I left my cell phone.
He's lying.
Care to comment on the twitching part or what?
So, Diana, would you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation?
Could you add to that conversation? Something I don't know. But that's what I've been. That's. I don't even know where my cell phone is right now. So I've been really trying to think about: is this controlling me? There are times where I'll be on it and I'll be like scrolling through stuff, and I'm like, I've been here like 15 minutes and I still want to look at this thing, and then I'm like, I have to go put it over there, shut it off, and leave it alone. And it's amazing how you can get just kind of lulled into, and I appreciate Facebook because that's where I catch up with a lot of people, family, friends, people I haven't seen, and I find myself scrolling through going, wow, yeah, okay, wow, they're doing good, and it's just, and then something in the back of my mind says, you're paying way too much attention to this. Shut it off. And then it's at that point it's a struggle to go, okay, because I could be on there for an hour or two, 11 o'clock at night, and I got to get up in the morning, and I usually try to go to bed about 9:30. Like, wow, where did the time go? I just wasted 2 hours looking at this thing. So it's the whole twitching. So I encourage my kids too. It's like, look, if you can't put that thing down and forget about it for a few hours, there's a problem. You're getting addicted. Learn to distance yourself and maybe continue. I don't know how each person will deal with addiction, but our whole culture is addicted to the things.
I agree. I put my life is kind of tied up to this. I mean, scheduling, emails, banking, the whole bit. So this seems like an appropriate place to go ahead and say something I was going to announce later. And I will kind of close out with this, frankly, unless someone in here has something else they want to add. For those of you who are watching us right now on Facebook and YouTube, that's one of the good things, I guess, that comes through technology and internet is that we have so many people, wonderful people who join us every week. They consider themselves to be part of this family. We consider them to be part of this family, and we want that to continue. But if you've noticed, more and more and more of these social media giants, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the whole lot of them, are determining what is good for you to say and what's not good for you to say, and what you should believe and what you should not believe, and what you should support and what you should not support. You've noticed that, right? So they've gotten us, and I say us, they've gotten the world kind of hooked on all of these things, and now they are incrementally, trying to tell you what you should think. And if it is an addiction for some, at what point will they come to the place of deciding, well, they're telling me what to think, and so I have a choice to make? Do I think the way they tell me to think, or do I say, bye? All right, so here's what I'm leading up to. I'm not, hear me carefully out there. I am not saying that we're getting off Facebook. I am not saying that we're getting off YouTube. We will continue to do those things. We'll live stream through those platforms as long as they will let us. But if and when, and I think it's probably just a matter of time, but when they start telling us you can't say this or you must say that, will be the day that we say, see ya. Okay? So that is why we have on our Jacob's Tent website a place that you can watch the live stream. So I would highly recommend, just seeing how things are going, seeing how things are trending, I would highly recommend for people who watch us on YouTube or Facebook to start considering watching us through the website, because it may not, it probably won't be next week. It may not be next month. It may be years from now, but there will come a day there will come a day that they will say, you cannot say this and you must say that. You wait and see. It's coming. So I don't want any of our Jacob's Tent family to be dependent on Facebook or YouTube or this or that. The Father has, for now anyway, the Father has given us an opportunity and people that know how to do these things that we can live stream without all of those things. We just haven't really pushed it yet. So I had no intention of getting into this today, but it seemed like that's the direction things have gone toward. Maybe the Father's trying to tell us all something. Maybe he's trying to get through to us on something, that we need to start weaning ourselves off of this stuff that keeps us tied up doing things that really are not that productive when you think about it, right? You know, there's much better ways to spend our time and our energy. We only have so many days promised to us in this life, and all of those days are supposed to be spent in his service. And so we need to be really evaluating how we're spending our breath and all that energy he's given us. So anyway, so I want to make certain that everybody heard me. Did I say that we were getting off YouTube? No. And did I say that we were going to get off Facebook? No, I didn't. What I said was, we'll stay on as long as they will let us. But when they start, I really shouldn't say when they start. They've already started. But when they get around to us saying that you can't say this and you can't do that, that'll be the day that we say bye. So we're already taking steps to make sure that we can live stream to all of our family out there through the website and be independent of all those different platforms. So anyway, Pearl, you're going to close us out today. You got the microphone, don't you? Yeah, you had something you wanted to add or say? Okay, well.
Okay. Sorry. Kind of what was Nate saying. I was all up about my phone. If I didn't have my phone, I'd be like, where's my phone? Does anybody have it? And looking back now, I'd be at my siblings like, did you touch my phone? Give me my phone now. Do you know where it is? And I'd be rude and a jerk to them. And I think maybe with my new baby brother, I've not been on my phone much. And I look back before he came, I was all about my phone and all about what my phone was showing me. Yeah, I keep saying, I'm sorry.
So the point you wanted to make was you should not be all about your phone?
Yes.
Okay.
I keep saying that. Basically, the phones, the electronics, as he said, good and evil kind of thing. And I see that, and I agree with that. I did do some unrighteous things with my phone, and I did some righteous things with my phone. And it all depends on what path you choose. Choose his path is the right path, but choosing your own path is basically saying, forget God. I don't need him. I'm going to go my path. And with some things that are on the phone, you only hear one side of things. Like what's going on, you only hear the one side. You don't hear both sides of things. So.
Well, yes, it made sense. There's a lot of things that we could say good about the technology, and I believe that the Father will allow us to use that technology. We're using it right now. But at the end of the day, nothing should stand in the way of what he wants to do in our life. We cannot have any of these things being the weights that keep us from doing what he's called us to do. Because somehow or another, without the internet, without television, even before radio, he was somehow able to get his message out. And it was through relationships. Yes, Ingrid?
And then sometimes God just throws it in the river. Like last Sunday, and I've been without a phone, and it's been very liberating. Can I just say, I was one of those who looked at my phone all the time, and it has been so awesome to be without my phone. So If anybody wants to go kayaking with me this weekend, let's go throw our phones in the river. It's been awesome.
Oh, that's great. And I think there's not a better way to end today than Ingrid lost her phone in the river. Yeah. You've been sanctified by the washing of the water. So. All righty. Well, it's been a good day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And who has the... Sungwon, did you want to say something, dear?
Yes, I do.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please.
Okay. I think iPad or phone, evil coming in to destroy us. Because this morning I have my husband say, I want to save you something. You have to come and see. So, okay, what is? And newspaper, people put it on Cleveland and Brown County have a coronavirus was bad. So I said immediately, okay, I'm not going to church then. I mean, we call church, easy to understand. Jacob's tent. And then I sit down and, I don't know, just coming all of a sudden, and I say, you know what? I believe in God. I want to believe in 100%. He said, yeah, sure. So I explained to him, remember Passover time, God giving King Herod committed who's dying. It's the first son is dying. So among the first son, nobody died. So our portion is put it on the blood in the doorpost. And he understand. Then I say, yeah, that's our things to do, but I'm not afraid of anything, virus or whatever coming. So that's why I'm here today.
Amen.
I say I'm not coming. I'm not going then, because he worried about bring it to him immune system
Yeah.
his germs. So I said I'm not going. Then after I explained to him, yeah, I'm going. That's why I'm here.
Well, we're glad you're here. And no, I understood you perfectly, And, more and more in the future, we're going to be faced with having to make those kinds of decisions. Whose report shall you believe? That's what we're going to have to. A lot of stuff is going to be coming on in the news, and it's going to be frightening. But that's why we need to keep our eyes on our Messiah. Amen? All righty. I was looking for somebody in particular. I don't see him. But anyway, brother, Doug, I want you to come up here and close us out in prayer. Doug and his wife are visiting us from Florida and are seeking the Lord about some things. So we want to keep them in prayer. All right? And brother, if you'll just dismiss us in prayer, I'd appreciate it.
Lord, thank you for giving us this day together. Thank you for allowing us to have this teaching. Thank you for allowing us to have this fellowship. Please bless all of us that are here. Bless the rest of our families who aren't here with us. Send angels with us as we go home. And thank you for all of the blessings you've provided to us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. An early Shavua Tov, everyone, and blessings to everyone out there. Thank you for joining us today.